set up. I'm going to share the
All
screen.
right. Meeting is being
Mark joining us today.
screened.
Welcome, Mark. Just getting started. I'm going to share the screen. Continue with the laws of Tumas Meis.
All right, very good.
How impurity spreads and what type of situations would contain an area to be protected from that spread. Okay, so we mentioned yesterday, we learned the laws of certain containers that if they're sealed, that impurity won't get transferred into it. So we're going to pick up from there. Let me share the screen.
All right.
We get going. Hold on. There we go. Okay, can you see that? I'm going to face to the screen just to read from it. So, Tumas Meis, the laws of impurity that's imparted from a corpse, and chapter 21, the first halakha, we'll read it in English. What is the source that teaches that a sealed covering saves the contents of a container from contracting ritual impurity within a shelter in which a corpse is located? This is a halakha that we learned yesterday. And he's asking, what's the source for us? So he says, it's from the verse in the Torah that says, any open container that does not have a sealed covering on top of it is impure. So the Torah says specifically that it doesn't have a sealed covering, and so anything that's in it is, or the vessel itself is impure. So we can derive from this that if there is a sealed covering on it, then it remains pure. Now, according to the oral tradition, what type of vessel are we talking about here? It was taught that the verse is speaking only about an earthenware vessel, container. For it is a container that contracts impurity only through its opening. Because the Torah specifically over here is saying is that when does it contract impurity? When it's open. And from this we learn that when it's sealed closed, it doesn't contract impurity. But what type of vessel is this? Only an earthenware vessel, because other vessels can become impure in other ways, from coming into contact with impurity in other ways. It's only an earthenware vessel that draws in impurity into its opening. From this we can infer the contents of any of the containers which are not susceptible to ritual impurity. So there are containers which are susceptible to ritual impurity. There's an earthenware vessel that's only susceptible through its opening. And then there are containers which are not susceptible at all to ritual impurity. The actual container is not susceptible. What are examples? So he says that if you covered such a container, then it would protect what's in it. What type of containers are not susceptible to ritual impurity? So the Rambam listed over here: containers made from cow turd, or a stone container, containers made from earth, containers made from the bones or skin of a fish or the bones of a bird, or an oversized wooden container, which you mentioned previously, or wooden boards that are flat and are not containers, metal kalim, so vessels that are made out of metal, which have not been completely fashioned. So a regular metal keli does receive Torah, but if it's been made but it's not complete, then it doesn't. It's not susceptible to Torah. So in all of these instances, the contents of all of these are protected by sealing the cover. If an earthenware vessel, which it only is susceptible to Tumah through its opening, and if you cover that opening, what's inside of it does not become tamei, even if it's in a room where there's a corpse. So we would say the same thing with these other types of containers that never become tamei, meaning, as a rule, they're even less susceptible than an earthenware vessel. Then certainly if there's a cover over it, anything that's within it will not become impure. Now, if the contents of a utensil closed with a sealed covering are protected, we can infer that this also applies to kalim that are swallowed or under an ohel, because those are, as if a seal closes it off, or an ohel, these are things that we've learned previously. What is the difference between ohel and containers that protect because of a sealed covering? So the covering of the container must be sealed, closed, while for an ohel, any covering is sufficient. Remember, we said an ohel is a space that it's at least a tefach squared. In other words, it's a closed area. He says, when we talk about this container, the seal has to be strongly closed in. When you talk about an ohel that basically creates its own room so that it's separated from the bigger room that it's within, and therefore not susceptible to tumah, that area can just be a loose covering when we're relying on the the intervention, as it were, of oil. But when we're talking about a seal on a container, it must be sealed completely strongly. And that would be the difference. Here's an interesting halacha. He says, if a funnel is turned upside down, it protects anything it covers from impurity. So you've turned it upside down, there's something under it, and there's impurity in the room. That little vessel under it does not become impure. And this is an interesting halacha because we've learned previously that if you had some a container or something or a vessel and it was punctured, then tuma, ritual impurity from the room could kind of seep through into that area. So the commentaries explain the difference over here is that because it's initially fashioned that way, the opening at the top of the funnel, or rather at the bottom of the funnel, is considered insignificant. So if you turn a funnel upside down and there's something under it, it's protected. He says, even though its other end has a small hole, it's considered as if it was closed. Halacha Gimel, all containers that protect their contacts when sealed, closed, also protect anything that is under them to the very depths if they are turned upside down and stood on the earth. So remember, we said those containers that if something's within it is protected, right? If you take that same container, you don't have a lid on it, but you turn it upside down over something. So he says it would protect anything under it, even to the depths, if they were stood on the earth, when the inner space is a handbreadth by a handbreadth. So obviously the space within them is a handbreadth by a handbreadth, even though one did not spread clay around the sides to seal them. So even if you didn't seal it, as soon as you turn this, here we're talking about those vessels that we spoke about earlier that are not susceptible to ritual impurity. He says why? Because the rationale is when you turn it upside down, it becomes like an ohel, and it simply protects it like any other independent kind of little room. The only exception is an earthenware container. For an oil formed by an earthenware container does not protect from impurity. You see, because the mitzvah speaks specifically about an earthenware container that says if you cover it and seal it, that's what is in it remains pure. It's not because you're creating an oil. It's because there's a special mitzvah that says only when it's open, it receives tumah, from which we imply that if you seal it closed, anything within it won't become tummy. All these other vessels that their inherent kind of what they're made of is not susceptible to tumah. When you cover it, in essence, what you're doing is you're creating an oil, a separate room into which tumah cannot flow. So he's saying if you turn it upside down over something, you've created the same effect. It becomes like an oil. It becomes like just another covering or another box or something that if it has the right amount of space, a tefah by a tefah, a handbreadth by a handbreadth, it protects its contents from tumah. So what I just explained, the Rambam speaks out here in the second part of that. What's implied? When an earthenware jug is turned upside down, even if one smeared clay on its sides, everything under it is impure. For the proof there speaks of a sealed covering on top of it, not a closed covering on its back. So when it comes to an earthenware vessel, there's no way of getting out of it because the reason why it protects what's in it is because it's sealed on top, not because it becomes like an oil. So if you turned it upside down, it doesn't help because now it's not sealed on the top. He says, and even if you put clay on it, around it, to close it off onto next to the ground, it wouldn't help. He said, if you attach its opening to a wall and smeared clay on its side, then that already is protecting anything that's inside of it, and everything that's opposite its opening in the wall would be protected because then it is like a sealed container and would be sufficient to protect it. If one did not smear clay on its side, it does not protect its contents because an earthenware container does not protect as an oil, as we explained. Again, he's emphasizing this point. If it was an earthenware sideways against the wall, so if it's closed but not sealed, it doesn't act as an oil, and anything it would become impure. All of the other containers that protect their contents when sealed closed do protect their contents when the openings are attached to the walls of a house, even when they do not have sealed coverings, because the basis of their protection is that they act like an oil. Therefore, it's necessary that the walls of the utensil be at least a handbreadth high, for the containers do not protect their contents with the walls as an oil, unless the walls of the container is at least a handbreadth. Basically, what he's saying is the space within the container has to be a handbreadth by a handbreadth, which is the minimum size of an oil, which would protect an area from being susceptible to ritual impurity. If the wall of the container was half a handbreadth, he says, you've got a little container, and it's only this wide, right? And you put it against the wall, but protruding out of the wall, there's something else that's half a handbreadth. So together, it creates a space of a handbreadth. He said it's not considered as an oil and does not protect the content that's in it, even though there's a handbreadth of empty space, because in order for something to be an oil, it's necessary that the handbreadth come from one entity. Hope that was clear. Halacha 4, just as such containers protect their contents from impurity when they are inside an oil and attached to its walls, so too do they protect the contents when they are outside the oil, if they are attached to the oil, for the oil is considered as a covering in all instances. Now, it's just as this thing creates a room within a room, it creates its own space on the outside of the wall as well. What's implied? He says, so example, a person has a samovar, right, a jug that you heat water in it, that has walls. In other words, the shape of the jug is at least is a cubit high, is an amma high, and was placed on its side on like staves, and it's outside a room, and its opening of this samovar is placed next to the wall of this room, the tent as he calls it. If there's impurity under it, so now under this samovar is something that's impure, a piece of a corpse that's large enough, then the kalim inside of it are pure. So it's closed against the wall, and there's stuff inside this jug. So anything that's inside of it, he says, sorry, I lost my place. If there's impurity under, the kalim inside of it are pure. If it was placed next to the wall of a courtyard, if the wall that this jug is placed against is not next to a closed-in room, but an open area, it's just a wall. So if it's the wall that it's touched against is a courtyard or a wall of garden, then it doesn't protect the contents, because these are not the walls of a tent. In other words, when you close the jug against the wall, it's because it's being incorporated into a separate room, and then it's protected. But if it's just on the outside of a wall that's not part of a closed-in room, it doesn't have the same effect. Therefore, any kalim in the container are impure, so they were held above impurity. Halacha 5. If there is a beam that is a handbreadth wide, running from wall to wall, and there's impurity below it, okay? And now there's a pot that's hanging on that beam, and the beam is touching the entire opening of the pot and covering it. So, and now there's something in the kalim, there are other small vessels inside that pot, so it's closed. Whatever's inside that pot is pure. The rationale is that they are saved by an ohel covering them, because this jug that is attached to the beam is now closed by the beam, and it creates this ohel space. That's fine. So the purity doesn't go into it. But if the opening of the pot was not covered by the beam, but instead there was some empty space between them, everything in the pot is impure, and the pot itself becomes impure, because you haven't created a closed space that it should be an ohel. It's open, and the impurity can reach into it as well. Halacha 6. So now we've been talking about different types of vessels, jugs, closed or leaned against, where the opening is leaned against something else. Now he's talking about something slightly different, a different type of space. So within a room, within a house, the following law applies when there's a cistern in the building. So you got a room and you got a pit in your home. And now there's vessels in that cistern. If the cistern was covered with a flat board or a container that can protect its contents from impurity, because it has a wall that is a handbreadth high, so it's at least a handbreadth high, everything that's in the cistern is pure. If the cistern had a border built around this opening that was a handbreadth above the ground, whether he then covered that border with a container that can protect from impurity because it has walls, or whether the container did not have a wall, meaning now you can use a container that the container itself doesn't have to be a tefach high. The container protects the contents of the system from impurity. So you got like a pit, you've created this border around it, and then put something on top of it. So even though the thing you're putting on top of it itself doesn't have a tefach, but because there's that border that you've created that has its own tefach, then that protects it, because there is a wall of a handbreadth from another source, and that kind of makes its own oil, its own container, or its own interruption from the source of impurity, so that what now inside that pit does not become susceptible to that impurity. Halacha 7. The following rule applies when a cistern is built inside a building and there is a lamp in it with its flower protruding and covering the opening of the cistern. I think when he means the lamp over here, I think it means the base is upside down. and it covers this pit. So now what happens is one placed a container that can protect from impurity in an ohel, where a corpse is located, over the opening of the cistern, and it's resting on the flour lamp. Okay? So now we need to see if the container, so this is a container that can protect from impurity. If it can remain there, even if you remove that lamp, then it serves as protection. When this is the case, it protects everything that is in the cistern from impurity. The kalim that are between the edge of the container that serves as a cover and the edge of the cistern are pure until the very depths. Even the lamp is pure, despite the fact that the edge of the flour is visible between the covering and the cistern. But if the container would not remain in place, in position, then everything is impure. So you've got this lamp upside down that's covering it, and you put something else on top of it that should serve as protection. If that thing can stand without the bottom of the lamp, then it protects it, even though right now it is leaning on it. But if it can't stay there without the bottom of the lamp, it serves as no protection. Halacha 8. Following law applies when a cistern is built inside a house and a container that could protect its contents from ritual impurity was placed over its opening. Okay, so if there was impurity between the edge of the container and the edge of the cistern, or within the cistern, the house is impure. So remember, this is the same as what we've learned previously. The oil will protect that some impurity doesn't go in, but not necessarily they won't go out the container. So the same thing is with the cistern. If the impurity is within the cistern, it doesn't protect the house, even though it's covered. The rationale is that an oil inside a building does not prevent the spread of impurity, as we've explained. It only prevents the impurity coming into it. If there was impurity in the house, and there's a hammered by a hammered of empty space in the cistern, the kalim stored in the walls of the cistern are pure. If not, they are impure. Okay, as we've said, if the width of the walls of the cistern extend outside the house, so there's a pit in the house and it goes beyond the walls of the house, they are nevertheless pure. And the rationale is that they are not the walls of the house. Just as the inside of the cistern is protected from impurity, so too its walls are protected. And we've already explained, so this new thing, we have already explained that an old oven, so an oven which has an opening and it's closed, is like all other kalim that convey impurity and is not considered as an ohel. For this reason, it does not protect its contents from ritual impurity unless it's sealed closed, like other containers that protect their contents when they're sealed closed. We've also explained that an oven is not considered a kalim in this context and does serve as an ohel if it's properly sealed. Therefore, it protects its contents from impurity merely by covering them without the cover being sealed closed like olim. Sorry. There's a word missing in the English. In the Hebrew, it says "V'chein be'arish tanir hechodosh," a new oven, meaning that you have this oven, but it has not yet been used as an oven. So it's just a container. So for this context, it does not serve as an oil. Therefore, it protects its contents from impurity merely by covering them without the cover being sealed closed like other oilim. The cover of an oven is called a serida. So he's saying until you use the oven, it can act as an oil, and it's not just like a regular keli. You wouldn't have to seal it completely. You just cover it, and it would protect whatever's inside of it. Halacha 9. The following law applies when there's impurity in the house and there's an old oven inside a new oven. Okay? So the old oven, remember, is like a keli, doesn't really protect, but the new one does. So now there's an old oven inside a new oven. And there's a serida, the covering, resting on the new oven, and that cover is being supported by the old oven that's inside. So he said, and obviously there's other vessels inside. We want to know, are those vessels now impure or not impure? So he says, we see whether when the old oven was removed, the cover would fall. If so, it does not protect from the impurity, and everything inside of it is impure. But if the cover would not fall, everything is pure. In other words, if the cover doesn't fall, then we consider that everything's inside the new oven, even though inside the new oven there's the old oven, but that itself is protected if the cover sits on the external new oven. Now, when there's a new oven inside an old oven, so it's the other way around, the old oven is in the outside, and the serida is resting on the opening of the old oven. If there's less than amber between the new oven and the cover, everything in the new oven is pure. It is considered as if the covering was resting on its opening. So what's in the new oven would remain pure, because even though the cover is on the outside on the old oven, but it's considered as if it's within a tefach, it's considered as if it's covering also the new oven. So that would protect from any purity that's out in the room outside of the two ovens. Halacha 10, when there's a covering of earthenware that has a border and extends beyond the edge of the oven. So it covers the oven, but it's wider than the opening of the oven. And the oven is closed with a sealed covering. Even if there's impurity under the covering or on top of it, everything above and below the impurity is impure. Nevertheless, the portion opposite the inner space of the oven is pure. So, in other words, it creates an overhang. So it's ever under that would become impure, even though what's in the oven itself and what's above where the opening is wouldn't become impure. That which is above or below the overhanging part would be susceptible. If there is impurity on the covering above the inner space of the oven, the space above it until the hem is impure. But anything inside of the oven is pure because it's sealed and it's a cover. So even though it's on the cover, but it's sealed and it doesn't go in, but from where the impurity is and above would be susceptible to that ritual impurity. And the final halacha for today, when there is impurity in a house and an earthenware pot was turned over it, so you placed it on the opening and placed on the opening of a, sorry, let me read that again slowly. There's impurity in the house and you have an earthenware pot that's turned over and placed on the opening of a jug. And then, and it's obviously there's something inside that jug, other vessels. So you want to know if it's going to become impure or not. And then clay was smeared on its walls and the jug is sealed to seal it closed. It protects everything inside of it and everything between it and the edge of the jug from impurity. If I'm placed it on the opening of the jug upright, you know, as if he turns it upside down and it becomes like a cover that is now sealed, that's fine. It will protect from impurity. But if one placed it on the opening of a jug upright, so you've got this pot, it's an earthenware pot, and it's facing upright, and the opening is open. Remember, that's how the earthenware jug receives tumah. But you've covered, so now the bottom of it is covering this jug. Now, even if you smeared clay around it and sealed it, it doesn't protect it. The rationale is that the pot becomes impure from its inner space. This pot that you've got on top is now acting as a cover. Because it's open, it becomes impure. And an impure utensil cannot protect another utensil from impurity, as we've explained previously. So even though it's covering it and even though it's sealed, but it itself is an impure utensil now because it's open to an area where there's impurity, it won't serve as that protection. Okay, Yeshikach. I see Stephen and Kent slipped in quietly, and Kent, welcome back.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi.
Thanks,
Let's go through these questions or a bit of a review.
I missed.
Sorry, Steve, what's that?
I'm sorry I was late, but I missed a couple of the chapters.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so let's read through the questions and see where we can get you, and make it a bit smaller so we can see the answers on the screen.
A very complicated one.
Which of the following containers do not prevent tumah from entering them, even if they are sealed closed? Containers made from stone, that's one option. Option 2 is containers made from steel. Third option is containers made from earthenware. Again, do not prevent tumah, meaning it will become tamei, anything inside of it, even if it's sealed closed.
Earthenware.
Yeah.
No, steel. Remember, earthenware that's the only way it does protect.
Okay.
And we learned from if earthenware is the only way it does protect, we said certainly
should have got that.
protected because it itself is not susceptible. But steel, right? The only steel vessel that wouldn't is if it was an unfinished vessel, right? But steel is susceptible to tumah, and even if you sealed it closed, it doesn't help. Because remember, the earthenware vessel, the reason why it helps when it's sealed is because it only receives those tumah from its opening. But a normal metal vessel is susceptible to tumah from all sides. So even if you seal it, it doesn't help. Does an upside down funnel protect what is beneath it from impurity? Well, it's a yes or no, but there's a no. The hole is at its bottom prevents it from qualifying as oil. Yes, the hole at its bottom is insignificant. So, right, clear halacha that it does protect, even though it's got a hole, because it's part of the design and it's an insignificant considered part of the design. Halacha 3. Question 3. Does a stone keli, a stone vessel that was turned upside down, protect what is underneath it from impurity? Only if it's sealed on the ground? Yes. No. Kalim never protect what is beneath them when they're upside down. Anyone remember what? Remember, stone is the category of vessel that itself generally does not become tamei. So what do we say? We say that the area inside of it is treated like an ohel. So the answer is that it would be fine.
Yes.
As soon as you turn it over, you're creating an ohel, and it would protect what's in it from being susceptible to tumah. And the final question, if a deep pit, so this is in a house, right? You've got a pit, and there's kalim inside of it, and there's impurity now in this building, and you cover it with a plank of wood. Do the kalim become impure? That's which is in it. So one option is yes, a flat piece of wood does not prevent impurity from spreading through it. No, the board with the handbreadth of space below it combines with the walls of the pit to serve to prevent the impurity from entering it. Okay, so the truth is, in the answer, he adds a detail which gives the answer, because this is critical. He says the board with a handbreadth of space. That's actually critical. So if it didn't have it, and then no, the kalim would not become tamei, right? Because it does protect it, but it protects it specifically if there's a handbreadth. So technically speaking, if it was wood that didn't have a handbreadth, it may not protect it. Okay.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
it.
you, Rabbi.
Yeah, we got a lot of minutiae when it comes to these laws, exactly how tumah transfers, doesn't transfer, what
Thank you.
What's and so on, each in its category and each according to its particular laws.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Rabbi, can you just explain again about empty space?
We learned the last the concept of ohel is that if you have a contained space that's fully covered and it's a handbreadth by handbreadth, it creates its own little area, and if there's no opening, tumah can't transfer into it. Okay, so it becomes its own. If it's a contained space, then the tumah won't go into it.
And oil is a contained space.
And therefore it would serve as a barrier also to anything that's in it or between two things as well. Okay.
As long as it's extra.
Thank you.